everybody. Welcome to the Truth Will Set You Free show. I am your host, Linda Diane Wattley, and you know I'm always excited about hearing the truth. We have a very, very special guest here tonight, Dewey Reynolds. Hi, Dewey.
Hello, everyone out there. How are you today?
I can tell you he is so many things. He's an author. He's a screenwriter. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Short stories?
Yes.
Right. So did you actually do them, or how did that come into your life? The screenwriting and,
Well, I'm very much an avid reader, and I've been reading all my life. But I love movies. I've been watching movies all my life. And I finally got to a point where I've always wanted to know how movies were put together. So I started reading books on screenwriting, and I started to looking at how screenplays are structured, and the dialogue, the interior monologue, the characterization. I wanted to learn all that because I've actually sat down and I've actually watched movies like The Godfather, like The Color Purple, like Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I've actually sit down and watched those movies, and have actually read over the screenplays as I'm watching the movies. So that's what made me want to get into screenwriting, because I knew that I could take some of the very stories that I've written and make them into screenplays.
Wow, that's interesting. One thing I learned about you, you don't mind doing research.
What's that again?
I said, one of the things I learned about you, you don't mind doing research.
Oh, I'm a research hound.
Oh my God, yes.
The meat of it. Yeah, I always get some teeth into my bite, as we would say. I'm a person, I want to find out. I want to know about certain things, and I just have to know. And if I have to dig and dig and dig, that's what I'm going to do to get the information that I'm looking for.
And you said you was in high school when you kind of realized that you could be a writer, because you was doing what, poems or?
Yeah, short stories and poems, and just little sketches of different things, because I've always been a very imaginative, creative person. I knew it was always deep inside of me, and I knew that one day that I would definitely bring that to the surface. I would express myself and pretty much try to really get my material out there. So it's something I've always wanted to do.
I tell you what I liked about it when you said it may not have made no sense to anybody else, but it made sense to you.
Oh yeah, I've heard a lot of famous novelists and screenwriters and people that write plays, etc. They'll tell you, like, at first, when I first started out, this didn't make sense to me, and probably I doubt if it makes sense to other people, but sometimes it does make sense to me. And what resonates with me, eventually, if it's really as good as you think it is, it will resonate with other people. So, oh yeah. And
you have written many books. To me, to me, it's many books when you go over 3.
I mean, writing is just something that I want to continue to do, no matter what level I get on, because I like to write thriller, suspense,
right.
Fantasy, sci-fi, and then, of course, my book, Two Shades of Vice, is the first nonfiction book that I've ever written.
But the thing about it, that's your most current book, but you had wrote a book that lets you know that you could actually be an author.
Yeah, I wrote a book. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I wrote a book that's entitled Brush Creek Charlie. It's a story about a serial killer right here in Kansas City, who actually is a shell-shocked Vietnam War veteran. And because of the fact that his mind is deranged, and because he suffered like a real bad mutilation in Vietnam, he wants to take his anger and frustration out on women. So he brings home with him from Vietnam a very large machete, which is a tool that he uses to dismember these women's bodies and throw them in trash bags and dump them down into this area called Brush Creek, where it's like a lot of woods and wildlife. And Brush Creek just happened to be a place that he would go as a child to run free and release his inhibitions. And a few people read that book, and they were thrilled about it. And I do believe that that book will see the light of day, because it's such a powerful story. So, oh yeah, I've written some stories that I think that people would really enjoy.
And you wrote some serious ones too. That one book you wrote about the foster care.
Oh yeah. I kind of want to redo that one, because that's like the part two to the book that I have out now about my life in this really abusive foster home, and that tells a really powerful story too. That's a nonfiction story too. So, oh yeah, I got my work cut out for me. There's a lot that I want to do. There's a lot I believe I'm going to do.
I believe that. Yeah, but that one there, that's when you really did some serious research.
Well, yes, I going on just my personal experience, things that I remember of being there, then also documentation that I received from the Division of Family Services here in Kansas City, which documented my stay in that foster home and then other foster children. Because during my 15 years of being there were a lot of people that came and went from that home. And not only did the people keep foster children, but they also kept mentally challenged and handicapped people. And believe me, our experience was brutal in that home. It really was. And of course, thank God I survived it. But I still have those bad memories that's etched into my memory. But oh yeah, I did a lot of research for that. I'm still holding on to some research material for that experience that I had.
So you said you was in one foster care for 15 years?
Yeah, from the time I was 6 months until I was 15. And then after my foster mother died, I went to stay with a friend of hers until I finished high school.
Okay.
And then, of course, I branched out on my own from there. But yes, I was in the same foster home for like 50. I was never adopted. Me and my brother and sister were put in the same foster home. And of course, they emancipated out of it like I did. But she kept many. Within that 15 years, I mean, it was like just like a gang of people that came and went from that home. So it makes for a very powerful story, and it's a tearjerker. Believe me, it's a story with a lot of abuse and a lot of violence and sex and a lot of profanity and God knows what else. But it's a very, very powerful story.
Well, I can say one thing. Would you say that writing was kind of a gift that kind of sustained your sanity during that time and kind of?
Oh yeah, because like I said, I've been a reader all my life. I love to read, and of course, that was like an escape for me as a child to do a lot of reading and everything. And I would just go in the basement and just read, or just go to the park and read, or go to the local library and read, and to get my mind. Because to be honest with you, because I know this is probably a whole new different story or interview or whatever, but growing up in that foster home. Because I remember me and my foster brother used to always talk about how we felt safer out in the streets than we did inside that foster home, because there was so much abuse and we were terrified. I mean, because the foster parents, they were like terrorists. They terrified us in that house. And when we would leave there, we felt safer being out in the streets than we felt being there. So yeah, writing became like an escape, and reading and creating and all that. That was kind of like my getaway, or just something to kind of like get my mind off for all the abuse that we were going through.
Like in Shay's advice, it's pretty much your parents because they were criminals, but did you have an interest before you realized they was criminals in criminology? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what the question is. And yeah, because I've always, as with a lot of other people, I've always been drawn to like gangster stories, mafia, organized crime. And in my latest book, my nonfiction book that I have out right now, Two Shades of Vice, based on the true story of an interracial couple's life together in crime, it tells you stories about how my father, who was an Irish white man, how he consorted with known gangsters here in Kansas City. I mean, he was good at hijacking trucks, carrying whiskey and cigarettes and beer and contraband cigarettes. He would do robbery assignments for these mafia guys. He would do hijacking assignments and all this, because these Italian vice lords were the ones who were the king of crime, in this city as well as other cities throughout the country. And he worked for these guys. And believe me, he made quite a bit of money doing some legwork for them. And yeah, the book kind of like touches on, some of his gangster content. But oh yeah, I love gangster story. I mean, we think of Goodfellas, Godfather, and etc. Oh yeah, I'm very much drawn to the mob stories.
And you write them very well. What fascinated me about your book, you were actually telling your parents' story, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
And the way you wrote it, you said it can be identified as a nonfiction.
Well, let's just put it this way. It's based on a true story.
Okay.
Now, there's some elements in that story, as with some other stories being written. There's some kind of like some sensationalism put in there to kind of like spruce the story up, you know, add some sensationalism to kind of like, you know, kind of like intertwine that with where it's kind of like where facts and fiction meet up, kind of like where they intertwine with one another. So I would say that probably 80% of that story is 100% true, and maybe 20% of it is based on some fictional material to kind of like I said, spruce things up. But I would say since it is based upon a true story, probably 80% of the content in the book is true.
And the way you wrote, like when you used that word vice, I was trying to figure out, was that the term they used back then, or did it replace a different word to describe what vice actually meant in the experience?
Okay, see, reason why I added that word vice in the subtitle, I mean in the main title, Two Shades of Vice, was because first of all, you have this white man and this black woman coming together to engage in a life of crime. But I have over 100 pages of police reports that were given to me by the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department about their criminal activity. And in those police reports and in those narratives in the police reports, they explained how Vice Squad, Vice this, the Vice Unit, the Vice Squad, and how, you know, Vice was investigating my mother and father. So that word vice was a pretty well-known or widely used word within law enforcement, within the police department. So I kept seeing that word vice. So I felt the need to put that in the main title, Two Shades of Vice.
And it was some serious racism going during that time. But I tell you, the thing that fascinated me was how the two people met.
Well, and you know, I've been asked that question many times. How did your mother and father meet? How did they meet? Okay, first of all, let me say this. My father was 26 years older than my mother. My father was born in 1905. My mother was born in 1931. And they met out on the streets because, you know, my mother, you know, was out on the streets soliciting prostitution. Okay, and he was a pimp too. He was a well-known procurer. And people may ask me that question, well, how do you know all these things? How do you know this? Well, I got plenty of documentation to back me up. So this isn't just stuff that people told me or hearsay. These things are documented through notarized documentation from the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. But I was going to say the way that they came together, he saw her out on the streets. And at his height, he had like maybe 6 or 7 women on the streets for him at one time. So he felt as though he could use her to help run the prostitution end of his rackets. And he had a body house where the same women that worked for him would bring the tricks to the house. My mother would take the money and escort them up to the room, and they had their little rendezvous, and then the trick would leave, and she's back out there finding someone else. So she was an asset to him. She was definitely an asset to him as far as like the prostitution end, and as far as like drugs and cigarettes and alcohol and spent goods and jewelry and hijacking goods and all that. He pretty much handled that end of it. So coming together, they made some pretty good money. I guarantee you, they pretty much stacked some tall dollars. So yeah, I would say that that's how they basically met, was out on the streets.
And it was interesting to me how she was in her craft and he was in his craft, and their paths came together even though they have different nationalities.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And of course, they both knew, like I explained in the book, is that they both knew what they were going to be up against. First of all, being an interracial couple, especially during the 1960s when the anti-miscegenation laws was still very much in full effect throughout most of America. Because we all know the story about Richard and Mildred Loving up there in Virginia, how they were arrested, how the police came in their house at nighttime and arrested both of them, and how they had to go to Washington, D.C. to get married and all that. But and then not only with my mother and father being an interracial couple, because they were involved with each other. They were romantically tied, not only through crime, but also they were involved with one another, but also in a life of crime. So pretty much mainstream white society would look, okay, first of all, they're going to rub it in our faces being an interracial couple when they know that we disapprove. And then they're going to be criminals together. They're going to be running vice together. Damn, they saw that as like a spit in the face. I'm like,
Yeah.
No, especially law enforcement, local law enforcement. They were infuriated. They would show up at their house and express their dissent all the time about, oh, you're going to be an interracial couple and you're going to be involved in crime together. Like, how dare you?
Did they ever marry?
They did. They did. I think they married because they got arrested for running that body house, that vice house, and I think they did like a few short years, 2-3 years, I don't know. Then after they got out, because I was born in 1964, and when they abandoned us, I was 6 months old. My sister was 4, my brother was 7, and I think once they decided to leave their life of crime behind because they were burnt out. They had lived on the edge all their lives, so they decided to just settle down. That's exactly what they did. They got married and settled down, lived together. And of course, he died in 1978 of a massive heart attack. So from that point on, she was just on her own. She never got involved with no one else. That was it for her.
Well, I kind of interesting that they was even capable of loving someone for what they was doing with people. You know what I mean?
Well, you know what? You raised a good point, but you know what? My response to that would be, I think even the hardest people can fall in love. I mean, even the most. Heck, I've even been told that Adolf Hitler, was kind and gentle to some woman, and this man was a brutal mass murderer. I mean, he was a genocidal maniac, but he still had a woman that he held in his arms. And he loved her, and he was gentle and nice and kind to this woman. So I believe that even people with the hardest exteriors can still fall in love and be kind and gentle to another person.
Then I wanted to ask you too, because they really was in some really life-threatening moments and situations, and especially your mom by herself for a while. She was really in a lot of life-threatening situations and moments.
Yeah, you know what? I tell you, because, some of the information I got in the book came from her. Because, even though for the first 12 years of my life, I didn't know who my parents were. I didn't know what they looked like, but I finally would come around and learn who they are. And even though only into my adulthood, because my mother died in 1999, but I learned a lot from her. She told me a lot about their life on the streets, who were some of the people that they forged alliances with, who their enemies were. And, okay, first of all, when my mother was out there on the streets listening, she never had a pimp. She never had a pimp.
Right.
And back then, it was pretty much, common knowledge on the streets that if a woman didn't have a pimp, then that was an insult to the guys that were pimps and trying to pull as many women into their stable as possible, that, oh, you're going to end up shot somewhere. You end up stabbed or cut up somewhere in the alley and all that. But my mother, from what she told me, she kept 2 razors on her. She kept one in her little bra brassiere, and she kept one in her little pocket. So she carried 2 razors with her. And so her thing was, she was hell-bent on never working for nobody. She wasn't going to have no pimp. And then not only that, but also, rival prostitutes. I mean, they figured, she's making all the money. She's pulling in all the tricks. And here we are, we barely making a dime. So we're going to have to cut her up. We're going to have to beat her up and teach her a lesson. So, yeah, being out there on the streets the way she was living a very dangerous lifestyle.
And together they were living one. I tell you, the one part in the book that I didn't like your dad was when he beat up that truck driver and peed in his face.
You know what? I'm gonna tell you the truth, Linda. And this is being dead sick, because some of my cousins on his side kind of like gave me some information about his background and history. My mother, because I only met the man one time, and that was a month before he died. Because, like I say, he died of a massive heart attack at home. She found him on the floor dead, matter of fact. But let me say this much, though. He was a very violent man. He was very brutal. I mean, he always settled arguments with his fists. And he always carried a gun on him. And from what they tell me, he was extremely violent. So that part in that story is very much true, where he was on a hijacking assignment. And one of the drivers of the trucks didn't want to give up the truck. So he beat the man up and urinated on him and did this. I mean, he was ornery. He's about as low down, as ornery as they came. This is factual about him.
I mean, the guy said he had a family. He said, I can't give up this truck because I won't be able to take care of my family.
And then I told you earlier, you know, they fell in love. They were together. He was nice to my mother. He never hit on her or he never abused her because she wasn't going to put up with it anyway.
He tried, though.
Yeah, he tried, but you saw in the book where she kind of bucked him. She bucked him. She was tiny. She was very diminutive. She really was. But at 4'11", you would have thought she stood 10 feet tall. Because she didn't take no crap, and I knew that about her because I got to meet her. But I'm just gonna say that was the ornery side of him. That was the low down, dirty side of him. You know, he just had that ruthless, demeanor about it. He was utterly ruthless, and in a lot of situations, that's how he was. And I think it was wrong for him to have been that way, but that's who he was.
Because they said even as a child, he had a pretty bad temper, like from birth.
Oh yeah, he was always, like I say, he always settled arguments with his fists.
Wow, but he was protective of the women in that house, though, too.
Yeah, that's the one thing about him. He didn't believe in abusing women. But as far as the guy was concerned, oh yeah, he'll fight. He'll beat up a guy. He'll shoot a guy. He'll do whatever he has to do. But even under the most extraordinary circumstances, he never felt the need to abuse women. Even the women that worked for him, you know, he made sure that they were well cared for.
Well, tell me this, because I just wondered about it, because they really could have been dead so many times. Do you think that they was just pretty lucky, or the devil take care of his own, or did God just cover them? What did you think it was?
Yeah, I think luck played a part because they pretty much had brushes with death on several occasions. As I explained in the book, where they had that run-in with the Ku Klux Klan, because it's no fact, from what I understand, there was a chapter of some Klan members from a chapter like 30 miles outside of Kansas City were watching them. And like I said, not only was it an insult to them being an interracial couple, but it was an even bigger insult as far as like them, an interracial couple running crime together and being in vice, making money off of vice together like that. And they waited for the opportune moment to catch them outside of Kansas City. And he had to get pretty violent to kind of like squeal their way out of that situation.
So how did you feel while you was writing that book in contrast to your other books?
This book is personal to me. Like I say, it is my first nonfiction book, but this book hits close to home because it is about my parents' life together in crime, their life together in general, and how they pretty much bobbed and weaved their way through life, because their thing was, okay, we're not 9 to 5 people. We don't want to punch a time clock for no one, and that we're going to set our own rules and we're going to live by our own rules, and this is our lifestyle, and if people don't like it, that's just too bad. They had a blatant disregard to rules in life and to law enforcement and to certain standards of morality. But at the same time, this book right here, I felt as though it was always in the making. This book was always in the making because of the fact that I had always been curious about their background. Sure, my mother told me stuff herself, but I decided to go and find out for myself from not only from the Division of Family Services, which in a few of those reports from over there said that my mother and father were known criminals, which prompted me to check into their criminal background. And when I did that, and they got to pulling up these police reports and these criminal rap sheets and pulling up these police mugshots, I said, oh my God, I did not know that my mother and father did all these things.
Do you have a picture of your cover with you?
Oh, yes, I do.
Show it to us. Look at that.
It is right there, 2 shades of white, based on the true story of an interracial couple.
Real people.
Yeah, that's, of course, I decided it would be a great idea to put my mother and father's police mug shots on the book, on the cover, front cover rather. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was a good idea. It definitely grabs you because these are real people.
Absolutely. You're dealing with a real story. Like I said, this is nothing. I mean, okay, like I said, some books are written where it's supposed to be factual from cover to cover. Every single bit of information that's put in these books is factual. But like I said, being that it is mentioned that it's based on a true story, just a small, very small portion of it is fabricated, but pretty much everything else is based on hard facts, as far as like from police reports, from criminal rap sheets, from eyewitness accounts. Because I've actually talked to people out on the streets that especially knew my father. Oh yeah, because his name was Gordon McCoy Reynolds, but everybody out there on the streets knew him as Mac Reynolds. He was Mac Reynolds. So, you know, oh yeah, everybody up and down Prospect and Troost and these other well-known inner city streets. Yeah, I knew your father. Yeah, he had women on the streets. He was pushing dope and selling bootleg whiskey and selling cigarettes, and he was doing it all, man. So yeah, I mean, I brought all that together, which I thought came up with a great story. When it was all came together in the end, I thought it was going to make a great story.
It definitely made a great story, I can tell you that. And I tell you, what fascinated me was how you imagined their language, their communication. The way
what now?
I like the way you imagined their communication and the different things that they would say to each other. Like, I think he used the N-word with her one time, and she
he
did not care for that. How did you know that that may possibly been a problem with them?
They fought. They had fight, but it never became like anything that was what you call. It was more verbal with them. I don't think they ever got into like no physical conversation. Like I said, my mother, excuse me, my mother was very diminutive in stature, but I promise you, at 4'11" and about 135 pounds, she didn't take no crap off nobody. And people always think just because you're big and tall and solid and muscular and a giant that, you know, you can shove everybody around, but there are some little people that you cannot shove around, you know. So therefore, with that said, yeah, she had to correct him, or she had to kind of like put him in check and let him know, don't use the N-word around me, because I'm pretty sure he grew up around either maybe some family members could have been racist or some friends of his could have been racist. And because, you know, she let it be known, I'm not going to demean your culture or your race, and you're not going to demean my culture or my race. So we're going to have a mutual respect thing for us. And I believe that in the end, they both honored that. We're not going to downplay each other's culture or each other's race.
And you know what? They basically was pretty healthy, except for she had asthma.
She was born with asthma. Matter of fact, she died of emphysema. And one may think that it was because of the fact that she smoked. No, she never smoked. She just had she just had respiratory problems. And it's something that she dealt with all her life. And she had to use breathing treatments all her life. And like I said, in 1999, in April 1999, she died of that. So, yeah, that was the only health problem she basically had.
And I tell you another thing that you brought to forefront, because it's also historical. It's a lot of history in that book, too.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that was really brought out was how the Black woman, or what they call colored woman during that time, was in high demand sexually.
You know, wait a minute, could you say that again, sweetheart?
Yeah. I was saying how, like I said, it's very historical.
Uh-huh.
And one of the things that was brought forward during that time was how in high demand the colored woman's body was sexually.
Oh yeah, you know what, Linda? I'm glad you brought that up too, because not only in Kansas City, but in most major cities, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit, New York, you name it. When white men would hit the streets, whether they were somewhat middle class or even wealthy white men, when they were looking for a good time and they were looking for prostitutes, they were looking for Black women. And from my knowledge is, a lot of them would skip over white prostitutes to get to Black prostitutes.
Right.
Because they had such a lustful desire, because, or they call it the bubbling brown sugar. They want some of that brown sugar. And what they couldn't get from their wives, they felt as though they could act out their sexual fantasies with Black women. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. In the book, The Autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley, there's an excerpt in the book where it talks about before Malcolm found the Nation of Islam, he came to Elijah Muhammad. He was a pimp up there in Harlem. And he was saying how white men would come in droves, and they were seeking. They knew he was a pimp, and they were seeking out black women. They were like, "Oh, we got to get us a colored woman. Me and my friends want to have a little party, want to have a little rendezvous," and he would supply these white men with, with black women. And the darker the berry, the darker the better. They say the darker the berry, the sweeter the juice. But the darker the complexion, the more drawn. They love the little brown, the cinnamon, the chocolate, the real dark. My father, I know this to be a straight up fact. My father knew that even as a white man, that he could make a lot of money he had one white woman work for him, as I mentioned, the young lady Kim in the book, and then he eventually had another one. But the women that would work for him were black women, because he knew that white men had a very strong desire to be with black women, even if it wasn't so much on an intimate level or on a level of like falling in love, but as far as like his sexual innuendos and his sexual prowess, and wanting to be with a black woman, wanting to touch her, wanting to kiss her, wanting to have intercourse with her. As a white man, my father knew that. So therefore, that is something that I know for a fact that he capitalized on. And a lot of the tricks because my mother told me this straight up herself, a lot of the tricks who would come to the house, all of them were white men. None of them were black men, none of them were Hispanic or any other type of men. These were white men who were spending good money to have their little rendezvous with these women that worked for my father. And my mother would be right there to greet him at the door and take the money and escort them upstairs. And they go in the room and have their little rendezvous. And like I mentioned earlier, then they would leave and the woman go out and find another trick. So, oh yeah, there was a strong desire by them to be with black women.
And I tell you another thing about that, still dealing with that a little bit, it was like, I don't know how women could be so comfortable, because they never knew when one of them could have been a KKK.
Oh yeah, that, a few people at work read my book, and there is an episode in there where one of the women who worked for my father, she picked up a white supremacist, but she didn't know he was a white supremacist. As you read the book,
right?
And got to the seedy motel room over there, excuse me, at the I forget the name of the motel, but it's in the book. But they went there to the motel, and then as they got undressed, she saw all these white supremacist tattoos. Then she saw the swastika. That's when she knew that he was a white supremacist. And then that's when he showed his bold, brash side by assaulting her and robbing her. And after that, she comes home and she tells my father about the incident. So him and one of his friends go out looking for the guy. They find the guy. And I kind of sensationalize or kind of like fabricate the way they did that guy. But they did beat him up, though. They gave him a good one. They beat him up. And that did happen, where one of the girls that worked for him did pick up a guy that was a white supremacist. He was posing as just a white man wanting to have a rendezvous, but she found out with all them tattoos and stuff on him of those symbols of white supremacy. And then he decided to rob her to kind of like further insult her and everything. So when she reported back to my father, let him know. And like I said, he was already a man with a volcanic temper. And he felt, oh no, I'm not going to let this go. Right. We're not going to rest until we calm this city and find this guy. And they ended up catching up with that guy too. Oh yeah.
Oh, you mean in the real world?
Yes.
Wow. I found that interesting what they did with him.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting. But you know what though, the part about them taking him in the tunnel and spreading the food, letting the rats finish him off. Now, he was around, like I mentioned before, he did have like strong ties or consorted with like some of these big time Italian vice lord gangsters. And if you really know the history of those gangsters, some of their methods of execution and punishment was beyond brutal. Yeah. I mean, it was monolithic. I mean, because I've heard personal stories about how I understand like back in the 30s and 40s here in Kansas City, if someone crossed one of them gangsters, they would give them cement shoes. They would take them to a private location or like a warehouse, and they would tie them up in a chair, and they would put their feet inside buckets and pour cement in there along with like concrete or iron slabs and let it dry. And then they wouldn't kill the guys, but they would let them cement shoes dry, and they would take them guys to the river. They would throw them in the river and let them drown.
Wow.
Yeah.
So basically, what do you want people to walk away with about that book?
Well, I want them to like get a history lesson. A lesson in history. I want them to learn about race relations, learn about racism, learn about love, learn about betrayal. Let them learn about how to pretty much try to treat people the way you want to be treated, and learn that sometimes in life, as with my mother and father, that you don't always take that straight and narrow road as far as like, oh, well, I'm going to become a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, a scientist, and all that. Sometimes, and not always the case, but sometimes people had to turn to a life of crime as a means of survival because they felt as though there was nothing else out there. And I believe that in my mother's and father's case, they felt like this is probably about the only thing we'll ever know. So we have to really do this, or either we're going to starve to death, or either we're going to just not survive. So they felt that was a means of survival. So there's so many different things in my book that people can walk away with, as you already know because you read it. And it's something that'll definitely leave you thinking. You will definitely have something on your mind like, wow. I mean, what people get out of it, I don't know, because everybody don't get the same thing out of all the literature that they read. But I just can say that they will get a lot out of it.
It's a lot to get.
Yes.
So, like, as an author, how do you decide, okay, I'm going to write a book now? How do you make that decision? I mean, do it something just haunt you, or you just addicted to it now?
It's no different than anybody else that's into the arts. Like whether you're a movie producer or screenwriter, whether you're an actor or an actress or a painter or a dancer. I believe if you're any of those things, I think it's just something that's deeply embedded inside of you. It's like a burning desire that people have. And I think it gets to a point where it's up to you to act upon it. And it's just like you just have to affirm to yourself, well, I believe that I can write a book. I believe that I can act in the film. I believe that I can paint a portrait. I believe that I can direct a movie, or I can write a screenplay for a movie. I believe that I can dance on Broadway. I'm a great dancer, and etc. I believe it's just something that's inside of you. So anybody who wants to write a book, I just think it's just something that you have to affirm to yourself. It's something that I can do, and it's something that I will do. And I will have the discipline to do it. And no matter how long it takes me, I'm going to do it right. And in the very end, I think what most writers affirm to themselves, the real ones do, is I'm going to stay true to myself, and I'm not going to let no one take my voice away from me. You always have to have your own voice.
Well, do you have any more new works in mind coming up?
Well, like I said, I would like to do a sequel to this Two Shades of Vice, which branches out. Because, like, if you know, of course, you read the book again. At the end of the story, my mother was pregnant with me. And from there, I want to talk about this experience that I had being in this foster home and being around a lot of the foster children and the abuse, and around a lot of handicapped and mentally retarded individuals who were also very much mistreated in this home. And that's an even more powerful story. I mean, because like I said, you can't let no one take your voice away from it. Someone may say, oh, well, the violence is too gratuitous. The language is too strong. The sexual content is too strong. I believe there are certain rules to writing. There are certain mechanics to writing. But I just believe that in the end, you have to stay true to yourself, and you just have to really write what you feel. Whatever's inside your heart to write, and you're feeling it. That's the best stories, are the ones that just happen. The ones that you're feeling. Them emotions are just rolling. And it's like a runaway freight train. You just can't stop, and your imagination or your creativity or all the research you do is just running wild, and you just like, oh, just let it flow. Let the chips fall where they may. But oh yeah, I would definitely love to do a sequel to this, and I'm definitely looking at some maybe cinematic potential for this, because this book will make a great movie. I mean, as I look back through it, and I look at all the little snippets and little episodes, and I said, man, this would really make a great movie because of the fact that the story is so unique and it's so different.
And the way you wrote it, it's like, just like you said, the way you closed, it's left open.
Yeah, and a few people that read it, they said the same thing, like, oh, God, you left me hanging, you left me hanging. But I feel as though, just like a movie, you only have so much time to tell a story. I mean, I wouldn't want to end up with a 1,000-page novel, a book that's 1,000 pages. So you just continue on to the next book.
Well, you definitely have a lot to give. And I was just curious, you know, would you consider yourself being raised parentless, or do you feel like you were parented?
Well, I want to say, to be honest with you, parentless. I mean, you know, growing up in maybe other foster children felt this way growing up in the system, but in my situation, it was like, you know, there's children who are very fortunate to have parents who guide them. They're guided, they're nurtured. I don't think I felt like I ever had that. I never had two parents, a mother and a father, to guide me and to nurture me. So I pretty much almost raised myself. So things that I had to learn, I learned on my own through trial and error, through mistakes and other things. I had to learn that on my own. And like I said, there have been those who have been fortunate to have a mother and father to tell them between right and wrong, or to tell them to go down this path, and, oh, I'm here for you, so anything that happens, I got you back. See, I never had that. So I was very unfortunate in that sense, but I'm a very spiritual man. I'm very, very true believer in the Creator, in God Almighty. So I do believe that there was those spiritual forces that were around me guiding me when I didn't have that guidance from a mother, that a mother and father would give to their child. I still felt as though those spiritual forces were around me, guiding me, and that's why I'm not caught up into this religious thing like so many just organized religious stuff. But I'm a very spiritual man because I do believe there is a higher power who is God Almighty. So I've held on to those spiritual beliefs, and I believe that is what has gotten me through.
Well, it's amazing. You are more than a survivor. I know that.
Well, I appreciate that. I thank you for that compliment. I
definitely.
Really do.
And you have something to give us, and you're giving it to us. You're doing what you were born to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like I feel as though I haven't even scratched the surface. I'm going to tell you this, Linda. There are millions of quotes made by famous people throughout history, but there's one quote that I think I'm gonna have inside my mind on my deathbed, and that's Frank Sinatra when he said, "The best is yet to come." Matter of fact, they put that on Frank's tombstone. The best is yet to come, and that's the way I feel. The best is yet to come.
So if people want to contact you or purchase your book, how can they do that? What should they get in touch with?
Well, first of all, they can go to my website, www.DeweyReynoldsBooks.com. That's www.DeweyReynoldsBooks.com. That's www.DeweyReynoldsBooks.com. Or they can go to Amazon.com and they can go to the book section and type in 2 Shades of Vice, and they can order from there either in print edition or ebook edition.
Dewey.
Yes, ma'am.
You are on the Truth Will Set You Free show. Give us a truth to remember you by.
Huh?
Give us a truth to remember you by.
Well, the truth that people can remember me by is I'm a very stand-up guy. I'm very stand-up. So that's the truth that everyone can remember me by. I'm a stand-up guy.
And you really are. And you are much appreciated, all that you have shared. I don't take that lightly.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that very much. I really do.
Right. And I appreciate you being on our show today.
Thank you.
And take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.